Actually, it should be the Prime Minister making this statement.
That is the question he should be focusing on right now.
Downright lie.
162 people have been referred to prevent.
That's why so many agencies knew about this incredibly dangerous perpetrator.
I would argue there's blood on the hands of this myriad of very difficult to understand government agencies and quangos.
Bad people will write the script. The man is a terrorist.
From MV UK, it's Pete Brown speaking and bringing you an update from this week. Has been an immense week in the news. It has been just so emotional. We've had the trial of Axel Rudakubana, and he pleaded guilty straight away out of the blocks. Caught a lot of people off guard. They were expecting a long 4 to 6 week trial, but he has pleaded guilty, and horrific, absolutely horrific. The parents, I don't even know where to begin. I'm father of twins. I've got 2 boys. I can't even imagine it. It's just incredible. Anyway, he pleaded guilty at the trial, which means that everyone can now talk about the situation. So following that, Keir Starmer put out an announcement, a statement. You can go and find that. It's all over the internet, so I won't go into that. It's been well documented and publicised. Following that comes the Home Secretary statement, which means all of the politicians, she puts out exactly what she's going to do to move forward from this horrific situation. And all of the MPs in the chamber get to put forward suggestions, ask her what happened, get to the bottom of it on behalf of their constituents. Now, whilst I don't normally like a lot of MPs because they're a bunch of liars on the most part, and they fight like rats in a sack rather than actually getting anything done, this time, because of the nature of the situation, they have absolutely come together and in a sombre chamber drilled in some very valid questions to the Home Secretary. And we're going to have a look at some of those now and her response to those questions. But there were probably about maybe 20 or so questions over the duration of a 1 hour statement. I've pulled out maybe 8 or 9 of them we can have a look at from different parties, covering different things, very valid. So why don't we get into that right now? Okay, so first up, we've got Dr. Luke.
Well done, Home Secretary, on the proposals you're bringing forward. You have my full support in turning over every stone to look into the cases, and I fully, wholeheartedly agree with all the powers you're bringing forward. However, that is half of the story. The Home Secretary rightly talks about the balancing of possibly a criminal maybe walking free, but the actual nature of having riots up and down this country that happened. So will she consider conducting a review on creating a framework about how government talks about these issues so that it's standardised with the media, so that there's no political point scoring across this chamber? Because at the heart of this issue is how the public perceive information was held from them. And if we can stop that, we can do a review into the rioting to make sure there are no further riots, because there weren't riots in October when this information came out. So there's a discrepancy there that needs looking at, and I'd be grateful if she'd take that up.
Well, I would sort of point out to him that the violent disorders stopped when people realised they would face consequences for it, and when there was a clear police and criminal justice system response, because there is no excuse for throwing rocks and bricks at the police. There is no excuse for throwing rocks and bricks at the very same police officers who had to deal with the most horrendous attack on those little children in Southport in the first place. And I think it's really important that this inquiry and this focus now needs to be on getting those children the answers, getting the answers for the families, for those children, the answers that they need about what went wrong in this terrible case, and not trying to somehow excuse a bunch of thugs who were throwing rocks and bricks at the police, for whom, frankly, there is no excuse at all.
Okay, did you hear that? So Dr. Luke is asking for more transparency, he said that if you released the information about the culprit Axel Rudakubana in August, it wouldn't have the riots wouldn't have happened. There wouldn't have been a void. It wouldn't have filled in conspiracy or whatnot. So, like he stated, when the information about the ricin, the manual, the Al Qaeda training manual was released in October, there was no riots because they quite frankly stated what everybody knew. Now what we need to know is, are those people that have been banged up for calling this guy out as a terrorist going to be released? They technically told the truth and they got banged up for it. That was out of order, unacceptable behaviour, poor government behaviour. So what we'll do is let's cut over to David Davis first. Here we go.
It should be the Prime Minister making this statement. I say that because this morning he said on television that singleton terrorist attacks were a very new occurrence. They're not. They've been going on for nearly a decade, many in London, one in the yard of this House of Commons, and of course one killed Sir David Amess, our colleague. And in that attack on Sir David Amess, the police declared it a terrorist incident the same day, without three prevent references, without ricin, without an Al Qaeda manual. They declared it a terrorist event the same day. So we all wonder why this was not the case here when there was such evidence. This is a clear mistake.
Terrorised more widely. And that is why we have to ensure that even where there are cases where the police or the prosecutions say they have not been able to prove ideology, that we still have the right powers, the right sentencing, the right ability to respond with swiftness and seriousness to the kinds of cases we face. And that is why he has said that this needs to be reviewed. I referred to the independent reviewer of terrorism, powers looking at these issues, and it's also why we have this statement to the House and are making this inquiry, because where I would disagree with him when he said, well, we've had these cases for a long time, the thing we've seen in very recent years is this really big increase in youth violence and extremism on a really disturbing scale, and I do think that needs to be part of the inquiry as well.
Okay, so so David Davis ultimately saying, look, you called out various other attacks as terrorism within 24 hours. Why couldn't you do it on this one? She's come back basically saying that, well, you heard what she said, she's putting it down to an increase of youth violence as opposed to understanding that it is a terrorist attack. So craziness. So thank you for that question, David. We are getting through exactly what's happened. Let's cut over to Richard Tice.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think the vast majority of the British people agree with the government's own independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, who said repeatedly that in these serious incidents, these horrific crimes, more information needs to be put out sooner to avoid an information vacuum. But that's in conflict, of course, with the need to prevent prejudicing a fair trial. And therefore, does the Home Secretary agree with me that it's incumbent upon us in this House to find a way to overcome and reduce that conflict so we get more information sooner?
Secretary. Well, the honourable member raises the issue about, particularly in a world of social media where there can be all sorts of information online and therefore there can be different kinds of information available, and yet, as he rightly says, we have to make sure that justice is done. We have to make sure that a jury is not prejudiced by information so that a killer can walk free, but we also have to make sure that people can get answers, people can get the crucial information that they need. The Law Commission is reviewing the Contempt of Court Act. That dates back to 1981, but I know he would recognise the importance of us following the law in the meantime and recognising the way we need to make sure that justice is done. And now that we have a verdict...
Okay, quick maths. 1981 is 44 years old. That law is 44 years old. I'm 48, so that was quick maths. It's just more calls for transparency. So very interesting there. Thank you for that, Richard. Let's go to our Next, okay, let's have a listen to Sean Davis.
I associate myself and my community with a statement from the Home Secretary on this tragic incident. Whether it be purchasing knives online or whether it be the sharing of these horrible videos celebrating violence and death, there's clearly a gap between the ability of the state to hold social media companies to account and also online retailers. What more can the government do, together with the intelligence services, to take robust action and hold to account these companies that are allowing this extremism, this violence, this horror to be present on their social media companies?
My honourable friend raises a really important point. We are raising with the companies some of the particular dangerous material that this terrible offender accessed online, and the police and prosecution will say more about some of that material later this week. But he's also right to highlight the issue around online knife sales, because we know from the case of Ronan Kanda, who was so brutally murdered by a ninja sword, where the perpetrator was able to get that, just buy it online, just pick it up with no age checks at all. And in this case, for a 17-year-old to be able to just get the knife that he was able to use online from Amazon, that is just frankly shocking. Commander Stephen Clayman has been doing a review for us on online knife sales and on the kinds of checks that should be taking place, and we will, based on that review, be bringing forward new measures to tackle this problem.
Okay, so that's looking into social media platforms which have inspired people to carry out these heinous attacks. They're going to go on a clampdown to make sure that they're on top of it so that it gets removed before it becomes a problem, or before it actually gets delivered into the arms of a 17-year-old who's clearly unhinged. Right, we'll cut over to Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Home Secretary has told us that last year alone, 162 people have been referred to prevent over concerns relating to school massacres. A truly shocking and disturbing figure. So could the Home Secretary please tell us how many of these people are currently in detention?
Well, he will know that the referral to prevent can be for young people who may have expressed an interest in school massacre, as opposed to those who have yet committed a crime. But the point of the Prevent programme is to try and get early intervention to take action to prevent young people committing crime. My view is that the powers are currently not strong enough to prevent young people committing crimes or getting drawn into this extremist violence, and that is exactly why we need to introduce the youth diversion order. That is a stronger power for the police to be able to take action in these extremely serious cases.
So, great question by Lee. Okay, so next.
It's important to note that this attacker is a terrorist. He's been charged under the Terrorism Act and the Biological Weapons Act. The man is a terrorist, Mr. Speaker. The attack itself has not been labelled as terrorism due to the lack of a clear ideological motive, a decision for the police and the CPS. Will the Home Office look into how our legal frameworks can be updated to recognise the full horror of acts intended to terrorise?
My honourable friend is right. We do need to ensure that the legal framework is up to date to make sure that there is the scope and the powers and the sentencing, frankly, as well, to ensure that where there are acts intended to terrorise, even where there is no ideology, that there are sufficient powers in place to be able to deal with this. And he is also right to say that because this man has been charged under the Terrorism Act and has pleaded guilty to a terrorist offence, I can confirm he will be treated as a terrorist offender in prison as well.
Good, throw the book at him. And I hope there's a welcoming party for him too. Never a finer candidate for a prison welcoming party. It's just beyond belief, innit? So, right. Let's have a look at two more to go. James Cleverly is on next. So come on, James.
Is it now not the time? And I appreciate this could be part of the review, but I would urge her to make sure this is a particular emphasis to the review. to get rid of this entirely arbitrary distinction with motivation and focus exclusively on the risk and the actions.
This was an attack that was intended to terrorise the community, and also from the point of view of families, the real concern is about the scale of harm that they've seen, the loss of children's lives and the impact on that community as well. The law is set out in the Terrorism Act 2000, and there is also a serious consideration for different agencies about the nature of the response. So if you have an ideological attack or a motivation, then it may be that the kind of countering extremism response, the kind of support that the Channel programme provides, might be targeted in one particular way if it is around an extremist ideology that needs to be challenged and tackled and taken down, or alternatively, if the issue is around mental health or the issue is around obsession with violence and gore, those may need different kinds of response. But he is right that the threats from the point of view of the community will feel the same. That's why the law needs to be looked at again, but it's also why we need to have this inquiry that can look at where the gaps are in the way in which different state agencies respond, because we've seen those growing gaps, and we've seen obviously those gaps in the most traumatic of ways in this case.
Yeah, it gives you food to thought. It gives you some food for thought, doesn't it? Too true. We've got to get away from. We just got to catch these people before they do it. Three. It's just incredible. Right, we've got two more now. So we'll start with Rupert Lowe.
I would argue there's blood on the hands of this myriad of very difficult to understand government agencies and quangos who charge around in ever-decreasing circles and blame everybody else when something goes wrong. So on that basis, will the Home Secretary commit to reviewing every single dropped or downgraded case where Prevent failed to act appropriately in order to avoid another heartbreaking catastrophe like this one?
Well, there are two things that are important that we have announced today. The first is the inquiry itself, which needs to go to the heart of what went wrong in this case, why so many agencies knew about this incredibly dangerous perpetrator who committed this barbaric act, but also to establish the new Prevent Independent Commissioner who can review cases, who can look at the different cases and the approach that's being taken to make sure that the right approach is being taken, to make sure that risks are being taken, risks are being identified, and frankly make sure action is being taken, because some of the information that I see that disturbs me, particularly some of the issues around the knife crime identified in this case, is strong enough action was not taken, and we need to make sure that it is to keep people safe.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to get the police arresting some of these people rather than tweeters. Right. So final question for this session from me. And the reason this is the final question, because a lot of the other questions actually asked the Home Secretary similar things, but just in a slightly different manner. So it's pointless playing those because you would have heard them. The ones I chose were the ones that actually were delivered with more impact, more emotion and relevancy. So finally, here's Ben.
On what dates were the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary made aware that Axel Rudakubana was in possession of ricin and an Al-Qaeda training manual? And will the inquiry cover public communications after the murders?
Ministers were, of course, updated throughout, and the Home Office was advised about ricin in August, and we were advised about the document much later on in October, and we made sure that the official opposition were also briefed. But in the end, those decisions and investigations are matters for the police on an operational basis. That is the tradition that we have in this country, where we have operational independence for policing, and why we also have the operationally independent decisions made by the CPS. And I actually think it is really sad that so many members opposite have chosen to simply ask questions about the timing of information when they know that this is governed by the Contempt of Court Act, and when they know this is about providing justice for families who lost their loved ones, rather than asking the serious questions about why that terrible and horrific and barbaric act took place. And I would really just ask him and other members who've decided which issues they want to focus on, they need to consider very seriously what they think is the most important issue here when so many lives were lost.
Wow. Unbelievable. Did you see the guy's face? He could not believe what he was hearing there. Poor form on the final question. I think the Home Secretary is getting a little bit rattled, a little bit very much under pressure. And, you know, so that concludes the questions that I wanted to share with you on this video. Thank you ever so much for watching. If you do like it, subscribe, like, share, all that stuff. And just the final word was, the final sentences was that Axel Rudakubana, the possibly in the top 5 most evil people out there. Bear in mind, we've got the killers of Jamie Bolger still walking around, or behind bars rather, but still on this planet. I'd go as far as to say I would actually call for capital punishment for extreme cases like this that cause national unrest. The unrest was caused by a complete vacuum of information. That's why I'm bringing you this information now, like this, so that you can actually understand. Not that I support them, not that I support them in a month of Sundays that are all a bunch of merchants, but the MPs have actually raised some very important questions and they're holding the Home Secretary to account. So keep talking, keep debating, don't cancel, don't fall out, bring a debate. It's okay to disagree. Leave me a comment. Let me know what your thoughts are of the questions and the answers that you've heard on this video. Till the next one, goodbye from now. That's me at Pete, MVUK.